Hey guys, it's Canadian. Welcome to another first look video for the upcoming expansion, Legacy of the Sith. I'm playing on the player test server, and today I'm going to be checking out the Gunnery Commando. So this is the revamped spec tree, and on the right-hand column here you have passives that make the spec what it is. So a lot of these are carrying over from 6.0, and they appear to be unchanged. So there are a few differences going to the expansion here for Gunnery Commando. Just to maybe give you a general idea, there's some pretty cool stuff going on as far as like cleave damage goes. It seems like there's going to be a lot of bursty kind of cleave that's just going to be automatic for the spec here. So that looks really cool, but I think for the upcoming expansion, the viability of the spec is really going to be called into question here, because I think they probably hit the class a little too hard with the nerf bet. I think they might need to roll some things back or make some kind of changes, because otherwise I don't know if they're going to be very competitive. So we'll get into more detail later though, but just to kick us off here, we'll look at Supercharged Cell first. So for each spec for Commandos, their Supercharged Cell was modified to be unique to that spec, so it infers some kind of benefit that's specific to Gunnery for what we're looking at right now. So you're going to be looking at increased armor penetration, you're going to have more alacrity stacking up, with every ability you do that basically deals damage. So it's really good, and your Supercharged Cell is a really good cooldown for that burst window you have here, and this extra buffs that you rolled into is actually really cool. And the other thing in this tier here is at level 23 you get your Grav round, but at level 27 tier here, this is where you get choices that can modify your Grav round. So the first one I'll talk about just quickly here is Gravitating Bolt. So it just increases Vortex Bolt by 50%, which is, you know, it's not bad, but your Vortex Bolt you're not using all that often. Like it's not a long cooldown, but I think when you look at your other two options here, I think this will probably do the least amount of damage. It might offer, like in a very brief moment, like some extra burst, but I don't think it's worth using, to be honest, compared to your other two choices. So the next one to talk about, Proficient Gravitation. So this will reduce the activation time of Grav round by 0.2 seconds, which is a lot. You would need a lot of alacrity to bring it down that much, more than is actually feasible to actually stack, really. And the other benefit here is it makes the cost reduced as well. So yeah, that's really good. You are losing as a commando the ability where I can't remember the name of it, but it would make whatever you wanted like cost nothing, and that was like on a short 1 minute cooldown. So yeah, the name escapes me here, but you don't have that anymore. So the benefit of this talent here is you're going to be leaning a lot more into being careful with your ammo now than you were in 6.0, so this will help alleviate some of that pain. And the reduced activation time on Grav round is really good in PvP right now too, because you're going to be put in positions where if you can cast a Grav round real quick and then continue moving for whatever you need to move for, that's going to be a lot stronger, obviously, in PvP. So that's a pretty good choice here. I can see this being a viable option. Now, the really cool one that I want to talk about here is Grav Trio. So what this does is it gives Grav round basically like a cleave effect. So 5 meters, I mean, it's almost melee range, but you're spamming your Grav round so much that this thing's going to be doing a lot of cleave damage. And there's some pretty cool interactions that happen with some other with another utility down later in the tree here. And we'll talk about that later. But just initially here, yeah, the cleave damage is so good, and it does apply an armor debuff to everything that it cleaves, and a vortex debuff, which is really important for possibly doing even more cleave down the road in the utility tree here. So yeah, I think this Grav Trio is probably, for my money right now, the best in tier, just because the cleave damage is so good. So next one to talk about, I'll talk about Sticky Grenade here first. Now, unfortunately for Gunnery Commandos, you're going to lose access to that talent you could pick up in 6.0, where it would give Grav round a 40% snare. That was incredibly strong in PvP, and because you're using Grav round so often, that snare was just always applied to your target, and then your Bolt Storm would apply that 70% snare too. So between the two abilities, like, you were locking down people pretty decently. And it was just automatic, you didn't really have to think about it. You're just using Grav round and your Bolt Storm all the time, so it was pretty sweet. But yeah, so you're not going to have as many snares anymore. That's going to be a bit of a problem, because you're not going to be as mobile probably as you were in 6.0. Or if you are mobile, in the expansion, it's because you gave up really strong defensive cooldowns to be able to be mobile. So yeah, it's kind of a tough choice that we have to make now. So with Sticky Grenade, the damage is like pretty decent. Like I'm not complaining about the damage on this one, but the big cool reason for talking about it is because it applies a really strong snare at 60%, and that lasts 10 seconds. So people are going to be definitely popping cooldowns to get out of this one here, and this is a fairly spammable grenade too at like roughly 14-15 seconds. So yeah, you'll be able to toss this thing out pretty often. So I think it's a really compelling choice for PvP because you're going to need to find a way to apply snare to people because yeah, I think you're going to need it. And the other options here to talk about, charge barrier. So this is kind of carrying over from 6.0, but now it's not baseline really. You have to kind of actually pick this. So it's a bit of a bummer, but the 6% damage reduction you get out of this guy here is really good. You're going to be spamming your Grav round pretty often and your medical probe every once in a while. So this buff shouldn't be too difficult to keep up for most people, I think. And yeah, it's good for PvP, just stacking damage reduction. But between it and Sticky Grenade, I'm kind of leaning towards Sticky Grenade just because I think I might need the snare. But you know, if it turns out mobility and is not a problem or survivability is not a problem, then okay, maybe I'll just pass it up and just go with charge barrier instead. But yeah. So the last option to talk about, stealth scan. This is no longer baseline as well, but they did really give this one some pretty significant buffs. And the downside of using this, though, is that you have to give up stuff that I think is better. So yeah, I can't see people really wanting this, even though like a lot of the benefits from picking this are pretty cool. But I think, yeah, your other two options for PvP are a lot better. So in the level 43 tier here, the really cool one I want to talk about first is thermonuclear plasma. So it's basically incorporating the tactical you used to have before, where if you threw a plasma grenade after hitting something with your grav round, it would spread that gravity vortex debuff to everything, and then when you used your demolition round afterwards, you would get like multiple rounds would be going out to everything that you debuffed. So it was a really strong AoE tactical for gunnery spec, and they've kind of rolled this into a talent you can pick now. Now, what's not obvious and what's really cool about this utility here is you don't actually need to throw the plasma grenade anymore for your demo round to fire additional rounds out now too. So if you combine this with Grav Trio, so your Grav round is like cleaving everything, it's also debuffing everything with that cleave as well, and then when you fire your demo round, it cleaves. So it's actually really good cleave damage, and it's just automatic, you know, like Grav round and your demo round, they're both your single target rotation, so you're doing cleave damage without having to really think about it, and that's going to be really strong, I think, in PvP. I mean, one Gunnery Commando doing it is going to do a lot of cleave damage, but if you can imagine a war zone where you have 2 or 3 Gunnery Commandos are cleaving the whole team down, I think that's going to be a little on the strong side. I think it's going to be pretty cool, interesting to see if that actually works out, though, but just at face value here, these two talents working together seem awfully strong. Now, you don't necessarily need to pick Grav Trio as well for spreading the debuff. You can, if you wanted to, pick something else for modifying your Grav round here and still go with thermonuclear plasma. It just means you have to tab target your Grav round on people, basically, and it'll still launch demo rounds. You don't have to go for Grav Trio on this one. So I'm not entirely sure if this is working as intended, this thermonuclear plasma. I kind of wondered if you still, like if it's bugged and you're meant to actually throw the plasma grenade, but for now you don't have to throw that plasma grenade, unless of course you wanted to debuff more targets than what your Grav Trio cleave can actually hit for. So but for now, it seems pretty cool not needing to plasma grenade. I think I would definitely be rolling with this one just because the cleave damage seems really good. So the other one I would talk about here just for a PvP context is Customized Round, and this increases the critical chance and critical damage of your demo round by 10%. So there's a lot of crit built into the spec as it is, so if you get something that increases the crit by even more, that just gives that one ability a really big punch. So it's kind of nice if you're looking at setting up a single target burst window, and maybe you don't necessarily need the cleave that thermonuclear plasma brings you, but I think I'll try both out, but I think just because that cleave damage is probably stronger, I think I'd probably go with that instead. But Customized Round, that's another viable option, it seems like, anyway. The third one to talk about here, I would need to see some compelling math before I think I would ever try this one out. But basically, it just gives your Grav round 5% more damage after you're using a demo round on the target. So I think maybe for like a boss fight and an operation, maybe the math would work in your favor. But for PvP, I don't see this one being too useful, to be honest, because it's quite a while before you can demo around somebody, and then to take advantage of it, you have to spam a bunch of grav rounds into it. Like, if you have to target switch in PvP, you're not going to see a lot of benefit, to be honest, if it's what I'm thinking. But with absolutely, though, nuclear plasma is going to see a lot of benefit, and the increased crit is always going to benefit every time you use your round. So, yeah, I think this gravitating compound is probably the worst one in the tier here. So your level 47 choices here, pretty straightforward. Just to mention it first, your Supercharged Celebrity here. If you are working in some kind of coordinated group, then you could probably really take advantage of this one here. But I think for most people who are just doing general PvP, I don't think you're going to really need this. I think you can get away with not having it. Because the cooldown is pretty long at 5 minutes, so there's not too many situations in a war zone where you have a really good moment for popping this, except for maybe at the very start of the war zone. But I think you will definitely get a lot of mileage in arenas and war zones if you went with diversion. Just makes you extra tanky when you kind of need it. So yeah, I think the class, from what I've seen so far in general, as commandos got hit pretty hard with the nerf bat. So any way you can increase your survivability right now in PvP's become really valuable. So for that reason, I think diversion is going to be really good. The next one, overclock. So this is just carrying over from 6.0 basically, and yeah, you get a little bit of cooldown reduction on your concussive round and tech override, and you get a second charge on your tech override as well. So that can help alleviate maybe some of the mobility problems you're going to experience in 7.0, but it's not like a great solution to it. But might give you like a small window where maybe you can make something good happen. But I think it's not as good as diversion will be. I think you'll probably find diversion will work out better, but you know, it's there for the people that need it. I know some people like that. Okay, so your 60 tier here, yeah, I think Reflexive Shield here is going to be like the quick and easy pick for me. I don't see the other ones being as good. Just reducing the cooldown, your reactive shield is so strong, and you can pair that up with trauma stabilizers as well later in the tree, so you can get a little more mileage out of both utilities that way. And of course, the absorb you get on this as well is really nice for helping you reduce some of the damage you're taking. So solid capacitor here, not great. Gunnery usually has pretty good energy management. You're not too crazy like you are with the Salt Specialist, so I think you could definitely get away without playing with this one if you're as long as you're careful with your energy. And it's definitely, you can play without this one. Tenacious Defense is also a pretty good choice here for doing PvP, because it's reducing the cooldowns of things you need to use all the time, so that's really good. Now, it's just a case of, you know, do you want to use that, or do you want to take Reflexive Shield? So I think Reflexive Shield's probably better for PvP, but if there's some reason you don't need the tankiness of this utility here, like say you've just always got a pocket healer with you all the time, and they're really good at keeping you alive, then maybe you can get away without needing this here. But I think for most people, Reflexive Shield is probably the best pick. The next three tiers here, these are the ones that cut deep, man. Like, this is probably too much of a nerf, just the way they've done the selections here. So just starting at 68, I think Forced March here is going to be your default pick, just because right now, you know, you're losing Hold the Line as your baseline ability. You're losing a snare in that Grav round utility being gone now, so you're not able to kite people as well as you used to, and you know, if you're trying to go after like a healer for something, you can't slow them down as much. So if you don't pick this, then you're going to be stationary for every bolt storm you try to cast, and you're already going to be stationary for the majority of the grav rounds you're going to cast. So you're going to be a pretty immobile DPS, which is not a good situation to be in for PvP. So I know like your other two options here are great defensive cooldowns that keep commandos alive through just about anything, but I don't know if it's worth a price of being completely immobile DPS, because that makes you super easy to kill, and it makes it far more difficult to kill other people. So that's for that reason I think taking Force March is going to be a requirement. So I could be mistaken on that one, but just based on what I've seen, I think if a commando playing gunnery isn't mobile, I think just melee DPS are just going to shit all over them because they can't run away. So hopefully that doesn't come to it, but yeah, that's kind of how it's looking like for now. But yeah, of course, your other choices in this tier, combat shield. So this is a really strong defensive cooldown, and it can also help pair up with your if you decide to go with the holy trinity of trauma stabilizers or reflexive shield. That'll give you like a super strong defensive. And the adrenal surge here. This is also a very strong cooldown for PvP. I think once you gain competency with the class, you could probably play without this. Adrenaline Rush is always going to be there for you. It's not as strong when you pick up this passive, obviously, but it's still going to save your ass when you need it to. So that one's always going to be there for you. So for my money right now, I think it's a choice between Combat Shield and Force March, and Force March probably being the better of the three here. But it's such a painful choice to have to make, though. I kind of almost wish that Force March wasn't a passive anymore, and it was just like built into the ability. So Bolt Storm is just by default a baseline ability that you can use on the move. Then you could probably change up some of the picks in these three tiers here, because they pick some things that just cut way too deep, in my opinion. So the 73 tier here, yeah, this is another shitty choice you got to make. So single target stuns are no longer a baseline for the class, and if you want it back, you have to pick it as utility now. But to get your single target stun, you have to give up hold the line or echoing turn, so you reflect. So that's a really tough call. I think because you really need the mobility back and the protection of not being snared by melee classes, and the ability to not be snared by like a healer, for example, and you can stay on their ass a little better yourself. So I think hold the line is going to be so necessary that you'd want to give up the reflect and stun. I could be mistaken on that one, but that's my gut reaction, is to say that hold the line is just too good to pass up. And not having echoing deterrence now, that really blows. That was such a strong cooldown for if you just need to get out of trouble. You could pop this and you were completely safe for 6 seconds, because if anyone hit you, they would just basically heal you to full. And no damage could hurt you, so it was such a good cooldown. But not having that now, I'm being very limited on the defensive cooldowns you can have. Oh, it cuts deep, man. I don't know what to say. But yeah, I think for my money on this tier, hold the line's probably the best, but I'll try to play without it too once the expansion hits, just to see if it's viable not taking it. We'll see how it goes. Alright, and the last tier here, this one, it fucking hurts as well. So, talking about Concussive Force here, this is a talent that was really good for helping you kite people or root them, whatever you needed. It was great for that. But it's no longer like an easy talent choice you just could always pick without really sacrificing anything. Now it really is a sacrifice to pick this one up, which really sucks. But you can try to play without it, but you're going to find that without the increased distance on the knockback, like for example, like a melee is probably still going to be able to hit you with like all their 10-meter abilities. Like they're not being knocked away too far. So it may be good, it may not be good. Not picking this one here, but yeah, it doesn't feel great. And the loss on the root sucks as well if you don't pick this talent, because that was such a good cooldown to be able to have to help kite against melee. So next one here, combat stims. This is painful again. So this is maybe one you could consider dropping before the other two, just because Gunnery's not terrible when it comes to energy management. So I think you don't have to rely on too much the energy you were getting back from this thing proccing all the time. And it kind of sucks losing the damage. The 10% damage you get when this thing did proc, because this thing procs fairly often. But yeah, it kind of sucks not having this all the time anymore. And your last option here is Trauma Stabilizer. So this was a super good cooldown to pop, because I can't think of many situations where if you popped a reactive shield, people would stop hitting you. Like, it's generally, people would tell you the entire time reactor shield was up, and you'd get like the full max stacks on your trauma stabilizers here, and it would basically max out your health again, whatever damage they did do while your reactive shield was up. So together with reflexive shield, it's a very strong cooldown for keeping you alive. But yeah, to use it now, you got to give up combat stims and your concussive force. So that's a tough call to make. So you can be pretty tanky if you pick up trauma stabilizers, but yeah, you got to give up something really good to take it. So that's kind of a almost too painful choice to make. Out of the other classes I've checked out so far, I haven't felt like the other classes had to make huge sacrifices to kind of maintain the status quo. I think the other classes, for example, like everybody seems to have gotten like a little bit of a nerf, so everybody has some kind of suffering. But the other classes, yeah, they're not given the impossible choices commandos are in these 3 tiers here. So yeah, it doesn't look great going forward. I'm a little worried that this spec may not be viable. You could probably play around how immobile the spec could be if the damage was really good, but if the damage is mediocre or comparable to what it was at 6.0 with how immobile or possibly not very tanky they will become, I think commandos are going to be in a bad spot, to be honest. So I'm hoping we're going to see some changes coming down the road, and I think we'll probably see some changes coming to thermonuclear plasma. It just seems either the wording needs to change or there's going to be some kind of bug fix, because this talent as it is seems really fucking good. So I hope it stays, but yeah, I'm thinking something's a little off on this one, so we'll see what happens. But that's it for gunnery spec. I think I'll cover assault specialist as well, because I saw some pretty cool shit was going on there for assault specialist. They have a lot of shit that's increasing their damage. They're actually going to be a really strong pick. I think they'll probably end up doing a lot more damage than gunnery. So hopefully they get the energy thing under control, because yeah, if they didn't tweak some numbers, it's going to be pretty rough, man, for assault specialists, that's for sure. Anyway, guys, I'll see you guys in the next one.